When the lawyer read my father's will, my brother smirked like a vulture fattened on rot. The estate, the land, the money, all rewritten to his name. My share? Gone. With a stroke of a pen, blood meant nothing, family meant nothing, and years of my sacrifice dissolved into dust. But betrayal has a flavor, and it lingers on the tongue until it burns. So I decided to burn him back, not with fire, not with fists, but with something he valued more than money. His wife. His precious, devoted, perfect wife who thought she married a man of honor. What my brother never realized is that loyalty isn't inherited. It's earned. And when I whispered truths in her ear, when I let her taste the bitterness of the man she called husband, she leaned toward me like a moth to flame. He stole my inheritance. I stole the one thing he could never buy back, and by the time he realized it, it was already far too late.
The first time I saw the crack, it was so faint most men would have missed it. But I've always paid attention to details. That's how I survived growing up under my father's roof, where love was currency and attention was a rare coin. My brother, Adrian, had always been the golden child. He wore his privilege like a crown, dazzling teachers, neighbors, and eventually his wife, Eliza. She adored him, worshipped him even. I could see it in the way her eyes softened when he entered a room, the way she straightened her back like a soldier awaiting command. But devotion, when forced to live with disappointment, always develops hairline fractures. And that night, over dinner, I saw the first one. We sat at Adrian's long dining table, surrounded by portraits of our ancestors glaring down at us in gilded frames. Adrian boasted about his new plans for the estate, my father's estate, gesturing with the arrogance of a man who had never earned a single brick of it.
"Expansion is the only way forward," Adrian said, swirling his wine. "Father built a legacy, but I'll make it an empire." Eliza smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her hand rested on the stem of her glass, unmoving, her knuckles white. She stared at the deep red liquid as though it had something to confess. "You'll do great things," she said softly, her voice polite but empty. That was the crack, barely visible, but there, a note out of tune. Later that night, when Adrian excused himself to take a call, I caught her watching me. Not with lust, not yet, but with something else, something dangerous, a question. And I gave her the smallest smile in return, just enough to suggest that I understood. I didn't need to chase her, no. I just needed to wait. Because once a woman sees the man she married for what he truly is, her loyalty is already halfway gone. All I had to do was guide it the rest of the way.
Adrian never noticed when people stopped listening to him. He was too busy listening to himself. At the dinner parties he threw, he spoke louder than the music, his laughter sharp and showy, his glass always raised too high. To him, every gathering was a stage, and every guest an audience. And Eliza, his perfect wife, was just another ornament, placed at his side to complete the illusion of power. But I watched her closely. I watched how her smiles stiffened when Adrian cut her off mid-sentence, how her gaze lowered whenever he bragged about decisions she had no say in. I saw the way her fingers traced the edge of her napkin, restless, when he drowned in his own ego. That's when I planted the seed. It was late, the party thinning out. Adrian had cornered a business associate, his booming voice filling the room. Eliza sat by the fireplace, Quiet, half forgotten, sipping her wine. I slipped into the chair beside her, close enough for her to feel my presence, but not so close it would draw attention. "You're quieter than usual tonight," I said. She looked at me, startled, then softened. "I suppose I've had enough of listening." "Adrian does love the sound of his own voice," I murmured, just enough to be heard over the clinking glasses. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. Not agreement, not yet, but recognition, a shared truth. I leaned back, my expression calm, unreadable. "You know, when Father was alive, he trusted your judgment more than Adrian's. He always said you had a steadier hand, a better instinct." Eliza blinked, caught off guard. "He said that?" "Many times," I lied smoothly. And there it was, the flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. Not love, not desire, not yet, but doubt. Adrian called her over then, his voice sharp and commanding, like a man summoning his property. She rose instantly, but not before glancing back at me. Just once, long enough for me to know the seed had been planted. Adrian thought he'd stolen everything from me. What he didn't realize was that loyalty, like land, can be cultivated, and unlike an inheritance, it can also be stolen. The first true break came on a Wednesday evening. Adrian had dragged me along to one of his business dinners, the kind where deals were sealed with whiskey and laughter rather than contracts. I had no interest in being there, but I went because I wanted to watch. Watch him in his element. Watch Eliza in his shadow. We sat at the long table of a private dining room, heavy curtains drowning out the city lights. Adrian was already deep into his third drink, his voice booming, retelling the same tired story of how he rescued Father's failing accounts years ago. A lie, of course. I was the one who fixed them, but Adrian had been standing in the room when the numbers turned, so he took the glory. Eliza sat across from me, her face composed, the pearls at her neck catching the candlelight. She smiled when expected, nodded when necessary. But when Adrian barked at her, "Eliza, tell them how proud Father was of me," something shifted. Her jaw tightened. Her hand froze around her glass. And then, for the briefest second, her eyes lifted to mine. Not desperate, not pleading, just tired. That was when I decided to move. Later, when the crowd thinned and Adrian was too busy entertaining the last of his guests, I found Eliza alone on the balcony, wrapped in her shawl against the night air. The city spread beneath us, glittering like a field of false promises. "You wear the mask well," I said softly. She turned her head, startled, then frowned. Mask? The smile, the nods, the perfect wife performance. I leaned against the railing, giving her space. I almost believed it myself. Her lips parted as though to argue, but the words never came. Instead, she exhaled, long and slow, her breath visible in the chill. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. She looked out over the city, her hands tightening on the shawl. "Adrian is ambitious," she said finally. "He has a vision, a dream for this family." "And in his dream, where are you?" Her head snapped toward me, eyes wide, like no one had ever dared ask her that before. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. I let the question hang in the cold night air, let it seep into her,
sink into her bones. From inside, Adrian's laughter roared, spilling out like an echo of everything false. Eliza turned her gaze back toward the dark horizon, and for the first time, her mask slipped.
It began with something small. A book. I was in the library, Father's old library, though now it legally belonged to Adrian. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, thick with dust and history. I ran my fingers along the spines, remembering how many nights I'd sat there, studying figures while Adrian was out chasing pleasure. That's when Eliza walked in. She wasn't looking for me. I could tell by the way she startled slightly when our eyes met, her hand tightening on the volume she carried. It was a collection of poetry, leather-bound, the edges frayed. She hesitated, then crossed the room. "I didn't know you liked this place," she said softly. "It used to be mine. At least, in practice. Adrian never had much patience for books."
Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "No, he doesn't." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the room pressing down on us. Then she placed the book on the table between us and ran her hand across the cover. "Sometimes," she said, almost to herself, "I come here just to breathe." I tilted my head. "Breathe?" She let out a quiet laugh, tinged with bitterness. "When you're Adrian's wife, you're always being watched, judged, expected to smile at the right time, speak at the right time, disappear at the right time." Her voice dropped. "But in here, no one's looking." It was the first real crack in her armor, and she had offered it to me willingly. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so it wouldn't feel like a question but a secret shared. "You don't have to wear the mask with me."
Her eyes flicked up to mine, searching, cautious. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I even exist to him, or if I'm just part of the furniture." The words landed heavy between us. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I only let silence answer her, because silence was safer than pity and stronger than sympathy. Finally, she shook her head and straightened, as though embarrassed by her own honesty. "Forgive me, I don't know why I'm saying these things." "You said them because you needed someone to hear them." And before she could argue, Adrian's voice bellowed from down the hall, calling her name. She flinched, collected herself, mask sliding back into place. But as she left, she glanced back at me, just once, long enough for me to know. The first confession had been made, and it would not be the last. It was raining the night she came to me. Not the soft kind of rain that whispered against the windows, but the heavy, pounding storm that made the earth tremble. I was in my father's, Adrian's, study, a glass of whiskey in hand, listening to the water batter the roof. The house felt hollow, echoing with absence, until a knock shattered the silence. When I opened the door, Eliza stood there, soaked to the bone, her shawl clinging to her shoulders, her hair a halo around her face. "Adrian's out," she said simply. "He won't be back tonight." She didn't explain why she had come. She didn't need to. I stepped aside, and she entered like a shadow slipping through a crack. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The storm filled the silence, and the air between us thickened. She moved toward the fire, holding her hands out to the heat, her shoulders trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of what she was doing. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "No," I agreed, pouring her a glass and setting it beside her.
But you are. Her fingers curled around the glass, though she didn't drink, her eyes fixed on the flames. Do you know what it's like to be invisible in your own marriage? To be spoken over, dismissed, paraded around like a trophy but never seen? Yes, I said quietly. I've been invisible my whole life. She looked at me then, sharply, as though realizing we shared the same wound. The firelight painted her face in golden shadow, and I saw it, the war behind her eyes. Loyalty versus hunger, safety versus truth, the wife versus the woman. I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. Instead, I leaned forward, my voice low, steady. Her breath hitched, her knuckles whitened around the glass. And then, for the first time, she stepped closer, deliberately. The space between us vanished, filled with the storm, the fire, the unspoken. She wasn't mine yet, not fully. But in that moment, her loyalty had shifted, just slightly, just enough. And Adrian had no idea the storm wasn't outside. It was already in his home.
The storm had passed, but its echo still hung in the walls. For days after Eliza came to me, the air between us was charged, dangerous. At dinners, her eyes found mine across the table, lingering longer than they should. In hallways, her hand brushed against mine as if by accident, but her fingers hesitated just a second too long. She didn't speak of that night, neither did I. But silence can be louder than words. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Adrian had taken a trip into the city. Business, he said, though we both knew it meant another round of indulgence in his vices. That left Eliza alone in the house. Alone, but not lonely, because I was there. I found her in the garden, kneeling among the roses, her gloves stained with soil. She looked almost fragile like that. Her hair pulled loose, her dress simple, nothing of the polished ornament Adrian paraded at parties. Just a woman, stripped of pretense. "You'll ruin your hands," I said as I approached. She didn't look up. "They're already ruined." I crouched beside her, close enough to smell the faint sweetness of the roses mixed with the earth. "Why do you let him do that to you?"
Her fingers stilled. Slowly, she pulled off her gloves, revealing raw skin, reddened and cracked. She turned her palms upward, showing me the evidence of neglect. "Because it's easier than fighting." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I reached out before I could stop myself, taking her hand in mine. Her breath caught. She didn't pull away. Instead, her gaze lifted, meeting mine with something fragile and furious all at once. "Eliza," I murmured, her name tasting dangerous in my mouth. And then it happened. She leaned forward, no hesitation, no fear, closing the space between us. Her lips pressed against mine, soft but burning, the taste of earth and roses and years of silence breaking all at once. The world stilled. For a moment, there was no Adrian, no inheritance, no betrayal, only her and the storm we had become. When she pulled back, her chest rose and fell sharply, her eyes wide, searching mine. "We can't," she began, but the words rang hollow. "Because we already had." There are lines you can step back from, mistakes you can bury in silence. But this kiss, wasn't one of them. This was the point of no return, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled and thrilled me, that I had just stolen the first piece of my brother's wife.
The kiss should have been enough.
a mistake to be buried, a secret to lock away. But secrets like that don't stay buried. They grow. The days that followed were unbearable. Eliza avoided me at meals, her mask carefully restored, her words clipped and formal. But the silence between us was different now, heavier, charged. At night, I could almost feel her restless steps pacing the hallway, hear the weight of her thoughts pressing against the walls. Adrian, of course, was oblivious. He was too busy expanding his empire, puffing himself up with false victories, too blind to notice the fire smoldering under his own roof. It happened again on a Thursday. Adrian had left for the city, and I found Eliza in the music room. She was seated at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, but never pressing down. When I entered, she froze, not from surprise, but from expectation.
"You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Neither should you," I replied, stepping closer. She closed her eyes, as though fighting some invisible battle, but when I laid my hand gently on her shoulder, she didn't move. She only exhaled, long and shuddering, before whispering, "I can't stop thinking about it." Her confession split the air like lightning. I didn't wait for permission. I bent down, my lips brushing her neck, her pulse thrumming beneath my touch. She turned to me, her mouth finding mine with a desperation that burned away every layer of hesitation. This kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't tentative. It was hunger, raw and reckless. Her hands pulled me closer, my fingers tangled in her hair. The piano bench scraped against the floor as we collided with it, the room filling with the music of our breathing, our need. "Eliza," I murmured against her lips, "you're not invisible to me." Her eyes blazed, and then she surrendered, utterly, completely. In that moment, the dam broke. There was no Adrian, no inheritance, no pretense, only two people devouring the parts of themselves they had been forced to starve.
By the time the storm between us subsided, the air was thick with betrayal. She sat in silence, her body trembling, her hands covering her face. "This is madness," she whispered. "If Adrian ever—" "He won't," I cut in, my voice steady, "because he doesn't see you. Not like I do. Not like I ever will." She lowered her hands, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of fear and longing. And I knew then, truly knew, that her loyalty had shifted. Not just her body, her heart was mine now. And that was a theft Adrian could never undo.
Guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't live in the heart. It lives in the details. Eliza's laugh came too quickly one evening, brittle and sharp. She set Adrian's wine glass a little too firmly on the table, her hands trembling, and when her gaze darted toward me across the dining room, it lingered a fraction longer than it should have. Adrian noticed. He wasn't a fool, at least not when it came to pride. His eyes narrowed, tracking her every movement, suspicion darkening the edges of his grin. But like most men drunk on their own self-importance, he dismissed the thought just as quickly, convincing himself it couldn't possibly be true. Still, something had shifted. The first close call came on a Saturday afternoon. Adrian had gone riding and was supposed to be gone for hours. Eliza slipped into the library where I was waiting, her eyes bright with both fear and desire. We barely had time to touch before the sound of hooves thundered outside. Her face went pale. "He's back early," she hissed, pulling away. We scrambled, her hair disheveled,
my shirt half unbuttoned as Adrian's boots echoed in the hall. She darted behind the shelves, adjusting her dress, while I forced myself to appear calm. The door swung open. Adrian stepped inside, flush from the ride, his eyes sweeping the room. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. "Reading," I said evenly, holding up a random book, something you wouldn't know much about. He smirked, but there was something dangerous beneath it. "And Eliza, where's my wife?" My heart hammered, but I didn't blink. "Last I saw, in the garden." A beat of silence stretched. Then he shrugged and left. When the door closed, Eliza emerged from the shadows, her hands pressed to her chest, breathing hard. We stared at each other, the enormity of what had almost happened pressing down like a weight. "That was too close," she whispered. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "That's what makes it real." Her lips parted, torn between terror and hunger, and then she kissed me again, deeper, fiercer, as though daring the world to catch us. But the danger wasn't only in Adrian's suspicions. It was in the way Eliza no longer cared about being caught.
Adrian always thought he was untouchable, that blood, money, and pride were enough to shield him from the consequences of his arrogance. He was wrong. It started with a quiet evening. I had invited Eliza to the estate under the pretense of a business discussion. She arrived, flawless on the outside, but trembling beneath her composure, the storm of our secret burning in her chest. Adrian returned early, too early. He didn't knock, he didn't announce himself, he simply walked in, catching us near the study, our hands brushing across the papers on the desk. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, and then Adrian laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound that made my blood run cold. "Well, well," he said, eyes flicking between us, "I see I'm not the only one busy tonight." Eliza froze. I didn't flinch. "Busy, perhaps, but only with truths you've refused to see." His face hardened. "What are you implying?" I stepped forward, letting my voice carry with calm authority. "You stole from me, Adrian. Father's estate, everything he built, everything he promised. But I've taken something far more valuable, something you can never reclaim." Eliza's eyes met mine, wide and unwavering. Then she spoke, her voice clear and unafraid. "I've chosen who I want to be with, and it's not you." Adrian's world tilted. He tried to laugh it off, tried to charm, to intimidate, but nothing worked. He realized, too late, that loyalty isn't earned by privilege or fear. It's given by choice.
"You," he stammered, rage cracking his voice. You've betrayed me." "Yes," I said, "just as you betrayed me." Eliza reached for my hand, entwining her fingers with mine in a deliberate, defiant gesture. Adrian's gaze snapped to hers, and in that instant he understood the full measure of his loss. He had inherited a fortune, but he had no heart to call his own. He had power, but it was meaningless without the people who truly cared. He had ambition, but it had blinded him to love and loyalty. And now he had nothing. The estate, the money, the name, they all remained his, but the life he thought he controlled had slipped away in a quiet, devastating turn. Eliza leaned into me, whispering, "I'm yours now, all of me, finally."
Adrian stepped back, his mouth opening and closing, words failing him. The throne he thought he commanded had crumbled. I had stolen his inheritance, yes, but I had also stolen the one thing he truly valued, the devotion he assumed would never waver. And as he sank into the emptiness of his own making, I realized the sweetest victories are never about money. They're about power and who holds it in the end.